When a woman who has walked the road longer than most of us have even dreamed, sits you down, looks you in the eye with the calm of experience, and says, "Son, let me tell you something," you do not interrupt. You do not scroll past. You do not brush her words aside. You stop, you listen, because buried in the wrinkles of her face are the years we haven't lived yet. In her silence is the wisdom of battles fought, losses endured, and victories won that we haven't yet imagined. She is not just speaking to fill the air. She is speaking to fill the soul. There's a fact, a truth, a gem that few men truly know and even fewer understand. But when this 92-year old woman opened her mouth and let those words come out, they hit like thunder wrapped in silk. She said, "Son, men ruin more than they build because they never learn to master what they're trying to lead." It took a moment to soak in. It wasn't just a statement. It was a verdict. What she was saying is that many men are in positions they never prepared for. Many are demanding submission without offering security. Many want loyalty but have not cultivated integrity. They want honor yet live recklessly. They want peace but sow discord. They want a woman to trust them, yet their own reflection cannot even vouch for them. That's a fact. Few men know it. Fewer accept it. But it is still truth. She continued, "A man's strength isn't proven in what he can lift, but in what he can hold." That shook me, because too many men walk around flexing muscles, while their emotional world is falling apart. They wear suits with nothing underneath. They speak loudly but say nothing. They chase money but neglect purpose. And this woman, who had seen men come and go, rise and fall, knew the difference between a boy who ages and a man who matures. She said something else that was like a mirror to the soul. A man who doesn't know who he is will always misuse who he's with. That sentence carries weight, because identity is the foundation of function. If you do not know your purpose, your power becomes a weapon, not a tool. If you don't know your role, you'll compete with the one you were meant to protect. If you don't know your value, you will sabotage your own destiny. She paused, looked at me, and said, "Son, most men think love is about control, but real love is about responsibility. Real love is a place where a woman should be able to rest, not wrestle. That right there, that will rewrite your definition of leadership. Because leadership is not domination, it's service. And love is not possession, it is protection." She told me about her late husband, a quiet man, not loud or flashy. But he woke up every morning and covered his family in prayer before he spoke a word. He didn't just bring money home. He brought wisdom, brought discipline, brought order. She said, "He didn't try to impress me. He tried to invest in me." That, gentlemen, is the measure of a real man. Not how many women chase you, but how one woman blossoms under your care. She said, "A man doesn't prove himself by how many hearts he can break. He proves himself by how many lives he can build." That's a fact. Few men know that the scars they leave don't disappear. They echo through generations. They echo in daughters who don't know their worth, in sons who grow up angry, in women who no longer trust. But on the flip side, when a man walks upright, when he fears God, when he leads with wisdom, his influence outlives his presence. His name becomes a banner of honor, not a curse to erase. And then she leaned in a little, lowered her voice as if about to share a secret heaven whispered to her soul, and said, "A wise man knows that quiet is more powerful than noise. A real man doesn't always speak. Sometimes he watches, he listens, he discerns, he prays, because not every battle is fought with a sword. Some are won on your knees. Men today are distracted. We are drowning in entertainment and starving for purpose. We chase validation but ignore revelation. We follow trends but neglect truth. And in the process, we lose ourselves." This elderly woman said, "Every day my husband would ask, 'Did I lead you well today?' That is not weakness. That is strength clothed in humility. That is a man who understands his position is not above her, but before her, to go before, to prepare, to protect." She said, "A man without vision becomes a man with violence." Because when you don't know where you're going, you get frustrated with everything around you. That's why we see so many angry men, angry at their wives, angry at their kids, angry at their jobs, angry at God. Not because life is unfair, but because they are unaware of their assignment. And when purpose is absent, pain becomes the master. She told me something I'll never forget. My son, the greatest thing a man can do for his children is love their mother right. That's legacy. That's how you break cycles. That's how you build generational peace. Because children don't just hear what you say, they become what you model. Your discipline becomes their standard. Your love becomes their compass. Your silence becomes their confusion. She looked into the distance and said, most men think the older a woman gets, the less she matters. But a wise man understands that the older she gets, the more she carries. And I realized this woman was more than a speaker. She was a library of revelation. She had carried burdens in silence, prayed through wars with tears, and still stood upright. Men who ignore this kind of woman miss out on the keys to a kingdom they'll never unlock. She said something simple, yet profound. Your wife is not your enemy, your ego is. That's the root of so many broken homes. Men who won't say sorry, who refuse to change, who would rather be right than be reconciled, who don't know how to serve without feeling small. But a wise man knows that submission isn't one. Sided it's mutual and it's powerful. Because when a woman sees that you honor her, she will multiply what you give her. A man is only as strong as the truth he's willing to face, she said, and that is the line that pierces deeper than any dagger. Because we can fake strength, but we cannot fake truth. We can hide behind titles, behind money, behind charisma. But truth stands when everything else falls. The truth about who we are. The truth about what we fear. The truth about what we've been called to be. This 92-year-old woman said, son, if a man doesn't have a prayer life, he doesn't have a plan. That took my breath away because plans can fail, money can dry up. Influence can fade, but a man who knows how to touch heaven will never be shaken. When storms come, and they will, it's not the loudest man who stands, but the man who is rooted. She said, there is a difference between a good man and a godly man. A good man might make you happy. A godly man will make you holy. And that, my friends, is where most men miss it. We pursue the temporary and forfeit the eternal. We focus on pleasure but forget purpose. We want applause but not alignment. But a godly man, he doesn't chase attention. He chases assignment. He lives to hear well done. Not from men but from God. She ended with this, son, when my husband passed, I didn't cry because I lost a man. I cried because the world lost a covering. That hit me so deep I couldn't speak, because real men cover, real men intercede. Real men build altars, not just empires. Real men know that power without submission to God is poison, and covering isn't control, it's intercession, it's sacrifice, it's presence. So to every man listening, stop chasing everything that fades and start becoming what remains. Stop demanding respect and start living in a way that commands it. Stop trying to be seen and start being real. The world doesn't need more influencers. It needs more intercessors. The world doesn't need louder men. It needs wiser ones. The world doesn't need more performers. It needs more protectors. That's a fact. Few men know this. But when you do, everything changes, because a man who listens to wisdom will walk in strength. A man who honors truth will never crumble under pressure. A man who leads with love will build what hell cannot destroy. That's the kind of man this 92-year-old woman raised. That's the kind of man she buried. That's the kind of man she prays this generation will become. May we be the answer to her prayer. She sat quietly for a moment, as if letting the weight of her words settle like dew on the morning grass. And then she said, son, the world doesn't suffer from a lack of men, it suffers from a lack of fathers. That truth lingered like incense in the room. You see, It's easy to father a child, but it takes the heart of God to raise one. A father is not someone who just provides, but one who presides. He is not just present in the room, but present in the soul. His voice becomes the echo that children carry into their futures. His absence becomes the void that echoes louder than any shout. So many men have built houses but never built homes. They've chased success but never shaped identity. And this woman, this pillar of grace, was not pointing fingers. She was shining light, because the goal was never to condemn. It was to awaken. She looked at me again with those eyes that seemed to see past my years and said, "Son, the greatest damage a man can do is leave a woman emotionally starving while feeding her with material things." And that hit deep. Because in this world of glitter and gifts, many think they can cover neglect with possessions. But women don't want more things. They want more presence. They want a man whose eyes see, whose heart feels, whose spirit discerns. A woman isn't drawn to the wallet first. She's drawn to security, stability, and sincerity. You can buy her the world, but if she has to beg for your attention, she's bankrupt in the ways that matter. She continued, "Your strength is not in how many women want you. Your strength is in how many temptations you can walk past. Now that's a kind of discipline the world doesn't celebrate, but heaven does." We live in a culture that glorifies indulgence, but discipline is the true mark of maturity. To look at what you could have, but choose what you've been assigned. To turn away from momentary pleasure in order to protect permanent purpose. To say no when everything in you wants to say yes, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. Then she said something strange but profound. She said, "The most dangerous man is the one who thinks silence means approval." She was warning against arrogance. So many men assume because nothing is being said, nothing is being felt. But a woman's silence is not always peace, it's often pain unspoken. A child's silence is not always obedience, it's often confusion buried. And God's silence is not absence, it's a test. She said, "If you learn to read silence, you will lead with sensitivity." And that, my brother, is the kind of leadership that restores instead of destroys. She touched her chest gently and said, "This heart has survived things I never thought I could live through. But I learned early. What you feed will grow. If you feed bitterness, it will take over. If you feed humility, you will become unbreakable." And that's when it became clear. She wasn't just talking to me. She was talking to every man who would come after me. Every man who would hear her voice through mine. Every man who's tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of carrying weights they don't talk about. She was calling out to the kings buried under years of pain, shame, and silence. She was saying, "Come forth." She said, "Son, stop fighting women and start fighting for them." That sentence burned, because too many men have become competitors with the very ones they were meant to cover. We argue instead of understand, we dominate instead of nurture, we run away instead of stay, but a man who fights for his family doesn't need applause. He needs an altar. He doesn't need an audience. He needs an assignment. Because when a man truly loves, he doesn't retreat when it gets hard. He digs deeper, prays longer, loves harder. She paused and then whispered, "Most men think they're alone in their pain, but they're only isolated because they've refused to be vulnerable." That was medicine. Because there is a generation of men bleeding silently. They were told real men don't cry. Real men don't ask for help. Real men don't break. And now real men are dying from internal wounds they won't speak of. But vulnerability is not weakness. It's courage. It's strength uncloaked. It's the ability to say, "I need help," and not feel like less of a man. It's the doorway to healing. She said, "Son, I've watched men destroy their own blessings because they never learned to listen." And she wasn't just talking about listening to a woman. She was talking about listening to life, listening to the signs, listening to your body when it's tired, listening to your soul when it's dry, listening to God when he whispers. Because a man who listens grows in wisdom, but a man who only hears what he likes becomes deaf to destiny. Listening is more than hearing words. It's discerning timing, reading seasons, understanding shifts. She told me, I've buried friends, I've buried family, but the hardest funeral is the one you attend for someone who's still alive but spiritually dead. And that's the danger of living without purpose. You can be breathing and still buried. You can have followers and still be lost. You can have a platform and still be disconnected. She said, don't wait for death to realize what you were supposed to become. Start now. Start with what you have. Start even if you're afraid. Then she leaned closer, almost like a grandmother tucking in a child, and said, every man has a little boy inside that needs healing, and until that boy is healed, the man will act out of brokenness. That's why some men are angry all the time. Why they're defensive, why they sabotage relationships, why they run from commitment, because somewhere a boy was hurt, abandoned, rejected, or unloved, and he never healed, he just got older. But when a man stops pretending and invites healing, he becomes powerful in ways the world cannot contain. She smiled gently and said, a man's value is not in how many people follow him, but in how many people flourish under him. That is leadership. Not lording over others, but lifting them up. Not demanding honor, but being honorable. Not seeking fame, but fulfilling purpose. She said her husband used to say, I don't need to be known by many, just deeply loved by a few. And that was enough for him, because he understood that depth is greater than width, that legacy is not built in crowds, it's built in quiet moments of consistency. She looked at her hands, weathered by time but steady as truth, and said, son, I never feared growing old, I only feared growing cold. And she meant that. She had seen too many men lose their fire, not because life broke them, but because they stopped feeding their purpose. They let bitterness in. They let failure define them. They let disappointment become identity. But she said, keep your fire, guard your oil, stir your gift, because a man on fire can light 1,000 others. And finally, as if the heavens had given her one last message for every man who would listen, she said, son, when you're old and grey and your body can't do what it used to, the only thing that will matter is who you became, not what you achieved. She wiped a tear from her eye. I've outlived my friends, my husband, even some of my children, but I have peace, because I know I loved well, I served well, I forgave quickly, I prayed constantly, I kept my heart clean, I watched my husband become the man God created him to be, and I know what that looks like. That is the kind of life that preaches louder than words. That's the kind of manhood we must pursue. Not the one filled with ego, but the one dripping with grace. Not the one consumed with hustle, but the one anchored in heaven. Not the one admired by men, but approved by God. Because when it's all said and done, we don't take titles with us. We leave behind our touch. We don't carry wealth into eternity. We carry the weight of our impact. That's a fact, few men know it, but those who do change the world one heart at a time, may we be those men, may we hear the cry of the 92-year old who has seen the beginning and end of many things, may we answer the call. May we not just be men by name, but fathers in spirit, leaders in truth, and lovers in action. And may our lives speak long after our voices fall silent. She sat still, almost like a statue carved by wisdom, and though her lips had quieted for a moment, her silence still spoke volumes. There's something sacred about a person who has walked through nearly a century of life, and still carries peace in their spirit. I looked at her hands again, hands that had held generations, buried loved ones, raised families, cooked meals for gatherings that were now memories, and wiped tears from cheeks that would never be young again. She said gently, son, the world teaches men to conquer, but very few are taught how to cultivate. That sentence dug deep like a seed into my soul, because it's one thing to win a woman's affection. It's another thing to nurture her heart daily. It's one thing to father a child. It's another thing to raise them with wisdom and presence. The world tells men to chase the next thing. More money, more women, more power. But the wise man builds, he nurtures, he plants. And the fruit of his life isn't in what he possesses, it's in what he's grown. She went on, the strongest men I've known were not the loudest. They were the ones who spoke little but lived much. You could feel their character in a room before they even opened their mouths. She paused and said, we used to have a saying, a real man doesn't need to raise his voice. His life already speaks loud enough. That kind of manhood is becoming rare, because men are now taught to perform rather than become. But your true power is not in performance, it's in presence. It's in showing up when it's hard. It's in staying when others walk away. It's in listening without needing to fix. It's in loving without needing to be begged. I asked her what makes a man trustworthy. She leaned forward, eyes sharp and wise, and said, consistency. That's the answer, son. A woman can forgive mistakes. A child can recover from failure, but inconsistency, it leaves wounds that don't heal easily. She said, be the kind of man who means what he says and does what he promises. Don't say you'll protect her, then become the one she needs protection from. Don't say you'll lead your children, then disappear when life gets hard. The world is full of men who speak like kings and act like strangers. But the world is hungry for men whose word is their bond, whose commitment is their covering, and whose love is not up for negotiation when seasons change. Then she said something so simple, yet so piercing, if you want to be respected, first become respectable. Too many men demand honor but don't walk in humility. They want the crown without the cross. They want the title without the towel. But you can't be a real man until you've learned how to serve, because service is the soil where greatness grows. She told me about her late husband again. He served our family, not because he was weak, but because he was strong. He fixed things when they broke. He protected our name. He never let us go to bed angry. He prayed over our children. He worked with his hands and loved with his heart. And you know something, I never once had to wonder if I was safe with him. That's what manhood looks like. Then she looked away, her voice lower, almost like a confession. I've seen too many men leave too early, not just physically, but emotionally. They were there, but their hearts had checked out. She looked back at me and said, son, don't be a man who disappears in the middle of the story. If you commit, then finish. If you start a family, don't let life's pressure make you vanish into excuses. Women can forgive pain, but abandonment leaves a scar that echoes for generations. She sighed. So many women today are not angry. They're just exhausted, tired of carrying everything while smiling, tired of hoping the man will show up, not just in body, but in soul. Then she looked straight into my eyes and said, don't ever let the world's applause make you forget your family's voice. Because what good is it to gain millions of followers but lose the respect of your own child? That truth cut through every image the world tries to sell men. Because your success isn't measured in likes, deals, or recognition. It's measured in how your family feels when you walk through the door. It's measured in the peace your presence brings, in the way your daughter lights up because she knows her father sees her, in the way your son learns honor just by watching how you treat his mother. She began to share stories of men she had known who had great potential but were never taught discipline. You can have the gift of a lion but the soul of a coward, she said, and if you don't conquer yourself, you'll destroy what God gave you to build. She talked about men who were brilliant but bitter, anointed but arrogant, talented but toxic. They were gifted, but they never grew up. They aged, but they never matured, and so they left a trail of broken people behind them. She wasn't judging, she was mourning, because she had seen too many good men fail, not because they were evil, but because they were untrained. Son, she said, train your soul before you try to lead anyone else. Learn how to apologize, learn how to repent, learn how to listen without defending yourself, learn how to say I don't know without shame. That's real maturity. And she leaned back again as if letting those words breathe. She said, I've watched men try to dominate their wives because they couldn't dominate their own egos. I've watched fathers discipline their children with anger because no one ever taught them how to love without pain. and I've watched pastors preach about grace while withholding it at home." She looked down, almost weeping, and said, "Don't become that. Be better." Then with a surprising grin she said, "Son, joy is a weapon. Don't let life steal your laughter. Don't become so serious trying to fix everything that you forget how to dance." That wisdom came like fresh rain, because so many men carry burdens heavier than their words can describe. Bills, expectations, silent battles, regrets, and in all of it, they forget that joy is strength, that laughter is healing, that rest is warfare. She said, "Your family doesn't need a perfect man. They need a joyful one who brings light into the house, one who plays, one who laughs, one who knows how to hold space for peace." She told me, "You will never regret being kind, even when others take advantage of it. You may lose battles being kind, but you'll win the war in heaven." She had lived long enough to see that cruelty never lasts. Arrogance always crumbles, but the man who chooses kindness, even in conflict, builds bridges where others burn them. She said, "Kindness is not weakness. It's wisdom wrapped in patience. It's power under control. It's what makes a man worth following, worth loving, worth remembering." As we sat in that quiet room, her words didn't feel like advice anymore. They felt like legacy. She wasn't just passing on tips. She was passing on a torch, and every man reading these words, hearing this voice, you are now the torchbearer. You are now responsible for carrying this truth, not just for yourself, but for every woman who needs healing, every child who needs covering, every community that needs leadership. You are not just a man, you are a seed. And when you fall into the right soil, you don't just grow, you multiply. The last thing she said before I left that day was this: "Son, love God with everything, because when your love for Him is real, everything else will fall in place. You'll treat people right. You'll make better decisions. You'll walk in purpose, not pressure. You'll live with vision, not just ambition." The fear of the Lord is not about being afraid, it's about being anchored. She smiled and said, "When a man is anchored, storms don't scare him. Temptation doesn't move him. He doesn't chase everything. He waits for what's his, because he knows who he is." So now I speak to you, brother, father, son, leader, wherever you are in your journey. This isn't just wise advice from an old woman. This is a divine echo from heaven through the heart of a vessel who lived long and loved well. She's not trying to impress you. She's trying to awaken you. The world doesn't need more loud men. It needs more whole men, healed men, present men, gentle giants, wise warriors, silent strength, loving leaders. That's a fact. Few men know it. Even fewer live it. But if you do, you'll be the kind of man whose life becomes a sermon, whose words become a safe place, and whose name becomes a legacy. Let this truth settle in your spirit, and live it out with every breath you take. So now, as her words echo through the corridors of your heart, let them become more than just reflections. Let them become a decision to rise above the noise, above the pressure, above the performance, and step into the quiet power of authentic manhood. You have heard the voice of wisdom, unfiltered, raw, and rooted in nearly a century of truth. What you do with it is now in your hands. Will you live to impress, or will you live to impact? Will you chase shadows, or will you become a light? This world has enough men chasing titles. It's crying out for men who carry substance. Your legacy won't be defined by what you accumulated, but by what you built, what you loved, what you healed, and what you left behind. Choose to become the man who stands when others fold, who speaks life when others curse, who loves with patience, who leads with grace, who protects with gentleness, and who worships with reverence. Become the man whose presence makes others feel safe. The man who never needs to say he's strong, because his life says it for him. The man who fears God, honors his commitments, serves his family, and lives on purpose. That's the man the world is waiting for. That's the man heaven honors. That's the man you were always meant to be. That's a fact. Now go and leave it.